The American middle class has become an endangered species in this country, but it wasn't always this way. There was a very long stretch of time in the 20th century when the middle class was strong, they were organized, and they were prosperous. But something happened in the last 40 years that shifted that balance of power, and I have Howard Nations with me now to tell us what happened. Howard, all of the, well, at least on the Democratic side, the presidential candidates are talking about the need for a strong middle class. It's a talking point that we have heard, since Obama ran. Most Democrats are always talking about the fact that we need a stronger middle class. And now that's absolutely true. But I guess the bigger question, the issue that nobody's really talking about is, where did the middle class go? Why are we having to invest so much time and resources into strengthening something that should already be there? Take us through the history. What has happened to America's middle class?
Well, Farron, post-World War II, from a period from 1947 to 1974, the United States emerged as the dominant force in the world in production and wealth. Our productivity rose 97%, our median wages rose 95%. Can you imagine that? In that time, a great middle class emerged in this country. John Kenneth Galbraith in '58 memorialized it as the affluent society. He said we have a new middle class that's enjoying egalitarian economy. Everybody gets their fair share of the economy. The household median income doubled during that period. And listen to this, the lowest 20% of wage earners increased their income by 42%. The wealthiest 20% of wage earners increased by only 8%. Now this is at a time when the highest tax bracket was 93%. The world's richest men, J. Paul Getty and H.L. Hunt, were worth $4 billion each. This is something, it sounds like in that particular 25, 26-year period, sounds like something Bernie Sanders would be advocating. Social programs of the GI Bill were there, education, professional schools were filled up. The college state tuition would be like $50 a semester for residents. You had Medicare, Medicaid, veterans benefits, and Social Security was enhanced. Civil rights legislation was passed, and we had a lot of women enter the workforce also. Rosie the Riveter from World War II decided she was going to stay on the job. But economic equality was limited to white males. The minorities and the women did not get equality and still don't have it in the workforce. But as far as the middle class family is concerned, they were getting a very good fair deal. It was largely because 1/3 of the workforce were union members, and they could battle head-to-head successfully with corporate America. And the raising of the union wages also caused the non-union wages to come up also. But that was fine up until 1974 when it all stopped. In '74, wages fell by 2.1%. Household income shrank by $1,500 a year. And '74 turned out to be, looking back on it, was an epochal sea change in the American economic history. It ended the age of economic security and began the age of economic anxiety.
Well, it seems like during the time where we have this prosperity, we have several things taking place. One, as you said, huge union membership in the United States.
Right.
The second, there were plenty of jobs to go around. We didn't have these disastrous trade deals in place. We had manufacturing in America. We had other jobs. We had women and minorities entering the workplace in an era, when before that, not necessarily going to happen for them. So we had opportunity, we had unionization, we had very strong government programs coming in to help those who couldn't enter the workforce or were still unemployed or unable. So then '74 comes along. We suddenly get this crash. Well, not necessarily a crash, but a downward trend. Things stop going up, they start going down. So what had happened at that point? Why the sudden shift?
Several things came together at one time. First of all, inflation hit America very hard in the early '70s. European and Japanese imports, particularly of automobiles, brought us our first trade deficit since the 1800s in 1971. Since 1976, we've had a trade deficit every single year. Then in the early 80s, there were three big events that happened. The first was the energy-induced inflation hit 13.5%. Now, the Federal Reserve Chief Volcker induced a recession. And in doing so, he said, now here's your beginning of the decline. He said, the standard of living of the average American has to decline. He raised the federal rate to 20%. Businesses declined, unemployment hit, the new high rate of 10.8%. The Midwest never recovered. To this day, the Midwest has never recovered from the millions of manufacturing jobs that were lost by steel workers and auto workers at that time. And the steel workers and auto worker income no longer rose with the company's success. Unions had been successful in negotiating, but that was no longer true.
And so once the union power started to decline, in the 70s, suddenly 1980 happens. And 1980 is really, if we have to put one single push pin on a calendar when things started to go horribly wrong for American workers and the middle class, it's going to be 1980, because suddenly we have the election of Ronald Reagan, and things have just never recovered from Reagan, have they?
They really haven't recovered from Reagan, but before we got to Reagan, though, there was also a bad response to inflation by the Democrats, by Carter and by Ted Kennedy, who were all in favor of deregulation. And the wages in the deregulated industries fell precipitously. Then at the end of that term, Reagan comes along, and ironically, Reagan had the backing of only one major union, which was the Air Transportation, Air Traffic Controllers Union. They went on strike, and of course we know he fired all of them and replaced them with non-union workers. Now, Reagan's action in firing the air traffic controllers set the tone for union busting that became the hallmark of successful Republican governors and remains so today. They later moved that on into public sector unions. They even had Continental Airlines set a new standard too. They filed bankruptcy, which used to be a shame for a business. They filed bankruptcy as a tool for busting unions, which they did successfully. And with all this happening, the unions lost the power that they had to strike. One other event happened in 80. The GE CEO Jack Welch declared that his company would reward shareholders rather than employees in the future. That was a new doctrine that Welch was proposing, and it was happily followed by corporate America.
Before that, and I think this is important to point out, at the end of the year, most employees at most companies could look forward to some kind of, end of the year bonus, a Christmas bonus, or whatever you want to call it. But then suddenly this shift takes place. Those bonuses stop, and they were bonuses for hard work. These were merit-based. And suddenly all of that extra revenue goes to the shareholders instead. We somehow shifted from thinking that it was important to protect the middle class, to have a strong working class in America, and instead we need to reward those who are already doing great, but they're doing great on the backs of the middle class. Those are the people that built this country, that built these companies. When Obama, let's go back to Obama's comment from a few years ago, the "you didn't build that" comment, talking to the 1%, that's absolutely true. It's the employees, the people who make these products. They're what make these businesses great, and those people at least used to be the middle class. Today, they're low-wage workers. They've absolutely destroyed any kind of protections for wages, for health, for safety, everything, all just to benefit the shareholders.
That's true. And then they followed that from 89 through 2011. These U.S.-based multinationals eliminated 3.3 million U.S. jobs. They shipped those jobs overseas. They left their money offshore to avoid paying U.S. taxes until George W. Bush came along and gave them a nice little tax holiday. Please bring your money back into this country and we'll give you very, 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 very small tax on it. So they brought it back, and as soon as they brought it back in, they started shifting money offshore again, and now they're waiting for their next tax holiday. So as America shifted to a service industry, as they drove the manufacturing and technology jobs overseas, Americans with very expensive college degrees who are heavily in debt are now taking low-paying jobs at fast food restaurants and retail stores to survive, because we now have a service economy and a paper financial economy. And so the effect of globalization and shifting U.S. jobs abroad recently has brought about something interesting. The revitalization of the STRAC, which went away, but the revitalization of the STRAC, as hundreds of fast food workers walked off their jobs last month, they're demanding $15 an hour and unionization. Now, McDonald's made $34.2 billion in sales last year, and Burger King and Wendy's each made $8.1 billion in sales, but they don't make enough money to pay their employees a living wage. So it's going to be very interesting to watch the effect of this unionization to see if it returns to power in the United States.
Well, I think a lot of things that people get wrong about the whole minimum wage argument is they think that, oh, well, this is teenagers. You know, these kids are 15, 16 years old. They don't need $15 an hour. But more than 75% of the minimum wage workers in this country are over the age of 20. They're adults. These are grown-ups, most of them single mothers. And we can't even afford, we refuse to afford to give them $15 an hour, a living wage, even though the areas where this has been put in place, they have seen remarkable economic growth. It did the exact opposite from what Republican analysts predicted. They thought it was going to burn down these economies. Instead, they're doing better than ever.
Right.
It all goes back to the fact, you know, again with the 80s, when we had this trickle-down, this shift in the mentality that we have to give the shareholders the money, not the workers. What actually turns out, if you want economic growth, you have to do the opposite. Now, I'm not saying shareholders shouldn't be compensated. They should be. But the workers need to be too, because without those workers, these corporations they're nothing. They have no product to sell if nobody's there making it. So we protect the workers, we build a stronger middle class, and we bring the American economy back up to where it needs to be. I mean, this seems like a no-brainer, but still, here we are, Howard. You know, for 40 years this has been taking place, and we still have not seen really any national movements to change this. I mean, do you see anything on the horizon that might, you know, bring us back to these days? You know, we have these union strikes here and there, which are fantastic, but something's got to happen nationally, right?
Well, the only thing I see on the horizon is bad. Because while most of what you just said came about as a result of Republicans protecting corporations and giving tax breaks and their perpetual ongoing war with unions, Democrats can't get off the hook either, because the democratic attacks on the middle class and on the unions have taken place too. Clinton, with NAFTA, eliminated 682,900 U.S. jobs, many of which were union jobs, and 415,000 of which were middle-class manufacturing jobs. Now, this was considered a major boost for the Mexico, but the economy there grew only 1.6% per capita. So if the money left America, left the American worker, and didn't make it to the Mexican worker, gee, I wonder where it went. And now we're looking today, right now, right this minute, we're looking at Obama and his Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is projected to virtually wipe out the remaining U.S. textile industry. Up to 500,000 U.S. jobs in America are in jeopardy as a result of the TPP. not to mention all the other things that will inevitably go wrong as far as the American worker and the American middle class is concerned from the TPP, just like it has with NAFTA and CAFTA and all your other alphabets from the Democrats. So the attack on the middle class proceeds apace, and I see nothing in the future that's going to change it.
And the biggest problem is that everything you just said about the TPP is only based on what we know of it.
Yeah.
We still don't even know the rest of it. I mean, they've only shown us what's been leaked out, which is just huge corporate giveaways. Big Pharma is obviously the big winner of the TPP. But overall, just as usual, the big loser, the American middle class, they've always taken it on the chin. And if we want a stronger middle class, if we want a strong workplace environment, it's time for strikes. It really is. We've got to get workers organized, unionized, and they've got to fight back. Otherwise, things are just going to keep getting worse. And the American economy and middle class families just simply cannot afford that.
Well, I have a suggestion for you. If you want to really help the middle class, we need a new bumper sticker that says, "Don't reelect anybody."
That's brilliant. Howard, thank you very much for telling us this story this day. We appreciate it.
My pleasure, Farron. Thanks.